So we're going to go through some background, additional background on this Luke 5, the calling of the first disciples and the miraculous catch of fish. So first we're going to talk a little bit about Hebrew parallelisms because they feature pretty heavily in the book by Bailey. So Hebrew parallelism, everybody knows a little bit of poetry. What do you think of when you think of poetry? Throw out some rhyming, right? The last roses are red, violets are blue, that type of thing. Symmetry, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Hebrew parallelism, is it actually poetry? Well, it's in poetry quite a bit, like in the Psalms, but it's not always poetry, and it's not just poetry. So it's an arrangement of ideas that help to, emphasize something else in the text, or point out what's the really significant part of the text that helps us to define terms, because sometimes you'll have, one sentence will say something, and then a sentence that's set up kind of in symmetry from that one will have either the same thing said in a different way, or it will say the opposite. So it helps you to understand what those terms and phrases mean. And there's a couple of different setups that they have. You see they have, Bailey broke it down into sequential. So you have, two thoughts that kind of go together, and then another two thoughts. It's the A, B, B, C, C. Set parallelism, so you'll have, A, B, C, and then you'll have kind of the same thoughts repeated again in another phrase or sentence or whatever. And then you have this one that's called inverted or chiastic structure, which you can see it's backwards from each other, and it's called chiastic because the Greek letter looks like an X. It's a chi, and it's because they cross in the center, right? The C's kind of intersect each other. So it's not just an art form. It's not just to make the stuff flow. It's actually useful in an interpretation there. So it's useful in interpreting, what the passage is saying. It can clear things up for us. So we're not always used to this type of thing. We're very, we have a certain flow of thoughts. We think in steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Everything follows. There's a beginning, middle, conclusion. We do this a lot. We see this a lot in preaching. We have, introduction. You have 3 points. You have a conclusion. So everything runs kind of in a straight line, with each thing separating or supporting the thing after it. But in this type of thought, you can see that you could have, the climax or whatever the main point is, like in the chiastic structure. The main point is going to be right in the middle. It's not going to be at the end. So the most important part of what Jesus or whoever is speaking, any prophet is saying, is going to be the thing that's in the middle. And one of the things that we're going to look at, one of the passages we're going to look at today, actually the passage, a couple of them, have that set up. So one sample parallelism, just to give us a little exercise and get us thinking that way, is in Luke 16:13. So sorry, I had to turn over to Luke 5, but if you want to turn over to Luke 16:13, we'll actually do a quick, it's just one verse, but we'll do actually a quick breakdown on the board. Let me know when you're there. You're probably there. All right. So Luke 16:13. Let's have somebody can just read that really loud.
No servant can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
Right. Okay. Great. So one thing that I kind of found helpful as I was moving through, and you're looking at these parallelisms, this is a parallel, has several parallel statements here. We're probably all familiar with it, but one of the things that I found to look for is an action, right? So look for a verb, like, and then look for either an object or a subject, of that verb. So you're going to find what is the action, what's going on in this statement, and who's it happening to, or who's doing it, whatever. So in the first part of 13, no servant can serve two masters. So we've got who's the what's the verb there? Serve, right? To serve two masters. Second part, what do we got here?
8.
Yep.
Love.
Hate one, love other. That's all right. Next, what do you got?
Suppose. And despise.
All right. Cannot serve both. All right. So we got our several statements there. Obviously, right? We'll call this one because that's pretty easy. So which part of this whole verse here matches up with or says kind of something similar to that? That's the last one, right? So we'll call that sure for now. We can call it 1A. All right, so we got a couple of different thoughts going on in the middle, though. What do we got here? We got, we'll call this 2, and that's pretty obvious, so hate one. Oh, wait a second, we got despise over here, love, and be devoted to. All right, so if you actually break these down into a structure, you actually match up. Should have done this a little differently, sorry. So you got serve two masters matches up with that one. You've got hate one and despise the other goes to that one. You got love one and devoted to one, the other. And once you figure out what the structure is, you might want to write it out a little differently. So what we'd actually do is, because it's not always going to be obvious, so you might have to do a little rewriting. So serve two masters, cannot serve God and mammon. Those would be kind of your bookends, right? Hate one, love the other. That's two separate statements. So you'd actually say, all right, let's put this, let's rewrite this and put love in the middle. Devoted is the, goes with that. So you'd say love and devoted. And then despise would go down here, right? And you'd end up with, those two being connected. So you end up with an ABC, CBA, chiastic X-shaped matchup there. So everybody kind of clear on how that works? Yeah. Okay, so just a quick exercise. There's another one in 1 Corinthians 1:17, and one of the important things to kind of point out here is that, there we go, that's easy. Sometimes, the verses and the headings and the chapters in the Bible, most, probably know that they weren't there in the original manuscripts. Yeah, sure. So they weren't there in the original manuscripts, and there's actually kind of an unnatural break. Let's see. Are you able to advance the slides for me?
I was trying, but I can do it for you. Yeah.
Let me see.
It didn't work.
Didn't work? Okay. I'll just kind of came down and do it. That's no problem. Those things aren't in the original, and there's actually an unnatural break in 1 Corinthians 1:17 and 2:2. So the chapter break happens right in the middle of a parallelism. So looking at that, we know that, well, one, the chapter break is in the wrong place, but that's one of the things we need to look out for, because somebody might have come along and put a chapter break in, and we're reading a passage and we're not getting the full meaning of that passage because we've broken our thought. If we read our Bibles one chapter at a time, which I think, many people do, you're going to kind of miss that. So it's the reason we're going over parallelisms, it's going to be relevant to the lesson today and probably throughout, these lessons. So another, before we move on to the text, is Jewish education. So it's pretty standard, and we know this information from the Midrash, which was it was the oral tradition that was written down about 200 AD by the Jewish leaders, because they were being more and more dispersed, and they were fearful that we're going to lose our oral tradition, so we better write this down. So they wrote this down, and basically one of the things that it outlines there is what Jewish education was like. So young children, it's kind of, a little bit similar to how we do primary school, and kids before they reach school age, they're taught by their parents usually, or some kind of guardian or nurse or something. From 5 to about 12 years old, they go to a synagogue school that was taught by a rabbi in the town, and if they showed a higher aptitude and were able to, they were like, okay, this is a really promising student. Some example from the Bible probably come to mind would be Paul, right? Really highly advanced. He would go on possibly to a more advanced Torah and Mishnah study. They'd learn, more about teaching in the Torah. Or if you were, an average student, or maybe, there could be a number of reasons, your family just didn't, have the ability, or the community didn't have the ability to support you going to learn from this rabbi. You'd go home and, be apprenticed to mom or dad. So at 18 to 20, you were able to get married, and you would probably be starting your career, or at that same time, you would become the disciple of a rabbi, and you would follow him along, just like the disciples followed Jesus. You would become a disciple of a rabbi who was kind of usually an itinerant preacher. You'd follow him in the community. So we're all familiar with that, right? How old was Jesus?
30.
When he started his ministry, he was about 30. So we don't actually know if, what Jesus was doing. We have a couple of snippets of what happened when Jesus was infant, being presented at the temple. Then when he gets a little bit older, about 12, so it still lines up with what we see here. They may have pointed that out purposely, the gospel writers, to say Jesus was one of these really promising students, right? So maybe he was one of these guys who, went on to this more advanced study of the Torah. We don't know. I mean, maybe Jesus just had miraculous knowledge from God. Maybe he didn't go to Torah school. But interesting to think about anyways. Because maybe Jesus was even going around to our text in Luke 5, and we'll read that. All right. Luke 5. One day Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid, from now on you will catch men." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. So here they are fishing on the Sea of Galilee, right? Another name for Lake Gennesaret, also called Sea of Tiberias. So, are there anybody in the audience? Anybody fish? Yeah. When's the best time to fish?
Usually early in the morning.
Yeah, early in the morning or night. A lot of people do night fishing, right? Anybody gone? It probably depends too, right, on what you're fishing for. So you could go out, if you go out on the ocean and do some deep sea fishing, probably quite a bit different than this. So the apostles, or the Simon and Andrew and James and John, obviously at this point they're expert fishermen, and they knew when to fish, they knew how to fish, they knew what they were doing. They had fished all night because they know that on the Sea of Galilee the fish come out at night and feed. And during the day, they actually go down to the bottom and they chill out in the rocks, right? So catching fish during the day is, tricky business. This is actually a boat that was discovered, I think in the 80s, and they could, kind of loosely termed the Jesus boat, because it is very much like a boat that they would have used in the first century. They actually dated it to the first century. It's hard to tell the dimensions here, but it's like 30 feet long and 7 or so, almost 30 feet long, about 7 feet across at the widest part there. It probably would have had a little mast and a sail that kind of went back like this from the front. But they use those throughout the Gospels, right? They use them when they're fishing, they use boats to cross the lake. All that sort of thing. So here is actually a satellite view of the Sea of Galilee. I was trying to think of what it looked like, and then I showed my daughter, and she was like, "It looks like a footprint." Okay, there you go. Looks like a footprint. So this would have been probably like where they would have been like over in this area here, because this is like the Galilee side of the lake. I think Tiberias is right here. There's a bunch of cities all around the lake up to the north. So
Gennesaret means harp. They think it looks like a harp too.
wow. I missed that one. It does actually look like a harp.
After you said it, I could see that. Yeah.
I think it looks like a footprint. That's what my daughter said. All right, so Jesus doesn't show up at the best time, but it's significant that when he does, Luke says that he was speaking the word of God to the people, right? So the people recognized him as a prophet. He wasn't just teaching Torah when he spoke; he actually spoke the word of God. So Jesus shows up on this scene, and it's inconvenient. They're washing their nets. It's not a good time to fish. But, and Jesus just walks up and sits in the boat. That's what the text is, right? Sitting on the shore, he walks up and he sits in it. He says, "Hey, let's go out, put out a little bit from shore so I can teach the people." And one of the other things that Bailey points out that's significant is, kind of doing and returning favors in Middle Eastern culture is like very important. Somebody does something significant for you, such as Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law, would have been really significant. And so Jesus coming in just, we don't know really how long that was between those two events, but Jesus comes in, sits in the boat, says, "Hey, Peter, put out a little bit from shore." Jesus is kind of calling in a favor here, and Peter's kind of like, he can't say no. I mean, that would have been, incredibly dishonorable. would have been unethical of him to do that. So it is a kind of a reflection of how Jesus comes into our lives at an inconvenient time, oftentimes, and just messes up our flow and tells us to do things that we wouldn't normally do. But as we'll see, when we obey, some cool things start to happen.
Yep.
And the content of the fish of Jesus' teaching to the people is not what's at issue here. What's significant is the call of the disciples. So Luke doesn't record any of what he's teaching, kind of like the Sermon on the Mount or anything like that. So let's go fishing. Jesus says, hey, put out into the deep and let down your nets. Again, it's bad timing. Peter's like, hey, I know what I'm doing. It's daytime. It's not a good time to fish on the Sea of Galilee. The type of fishing they were doing is done at night. You don't do it in the deep. Peter's skeptical, right? He said what he essentially, his response to Jesus is essentially kind of, well, you're the boss, whatever you say. It's not really like, hey, I'm gonna listen to you and totally trust you. It's kind of skeptical, and the word that he uses is actually this Greek word epistates. And it's interesting. It means like boss or master or supervisor or anything like that. But Luke uses it in a few different places. And it seems like every time he uses this word, Luke is pointing out that the people who are interacting with Jesus are missing the point of who Jesus is, because they call him. Most of our translations say master. There's actually a couple different words for master. This isn't the same one that's used elsewhere. So Luke uses this again in a boat when the big storm comes up in Luke 8. They call out to Jesus who's asleep. They call him epistates, master, master. Don't you care that we're perishing? There's a let's see. Sorry. The other one is the woman who had been bleeding, right? The crowds are pressing around Jesus. The woman's bleeding. She comes up and she touches him. He says, who touched me? And the disciples are like, again, epistates, master, everybody's pressing around you. What are you talking about? There's lots of people touching you. On the mountain with Moses and Elijah, that's a big kind of mess up on the part of the disciples, right? They're like, hey, Moses and Elijah are here. Let's build a few tents, and we'll just set up shop right here because this is super cool. And they use that same word there, and then the voice, speaks, and they're like, okay, that was bad. Shouldn't have done that. So the lepers also use that usage. Here's an artist. I thought this was interesting. Artist kind of rendition of this is from Raphael. These boats are pretty small, so it wouldn't have really taken much to fill up and swamp them. And they're a little cramped, and they're always these guys in these. They're always ripped. Like, I think they were probably more like really skinny but really strong, type of guys. I did learn a new word here, right? Bathymetry is actually the study of the depth of bodies of water. Bathymetrics, I guess. Yeah. Bathymetry. So the Sea of Galilee is 43 meters deep at its deepest point, but you can see right even near the shore, it's 10 meters deep. So that's pretty deep. So when Jesus said, "Put out in the deep," didn't necessarily go very far. So anyways, they have this miraculous catch of fish after listening to Jesus, and another thing that Bailey points out is they signaled to their partners. They were like, over here, it doesn't say that they called to them. And one of the reasons that he points out there is that sound would have traveled really well on the water, really far. So if you got these guys shouting, you got a lot of other fishermen on the shore, they would have been like, whoa, they just made a big catch. Let's go grab our nets and go steal this. And they would, so they would try to, they were trying to keep it, on the down low, not let everybody know that they just made, hit the jackpot So Peter sees that Jesus had the ability to quickly make a lot of money. And that blew Peter away. His first response was, oh my gosh, look at all this bank we're going to make. This is going to be a big thing. I mean, this is everybody's dream around the lake, right? These fishermen, they want to make it big. They want to have a big catch. They take this, to market or whatever. They sell it. They make a lot of money. So Jesus had this ability, but instead he was just an itinerant preacher going around living, a pretty humble lifestyle and teaching people. That he had given up his ability, even though he had the ability to make a ton of money, he gave that up in order to teach the word. This blew Peter away afterwards, right? And Jesus graduates in Peter's vision from just apostates, right? He's not just a boss or whatever anymore. Now he's kurios, right, which means Lord. So Peter, initially skeptical of Jesus, I don't know, I'm going to listen to you anyways, even though it doesn't really make any sense to me. And afterwards, he's like, you are the Lord, okay? All of them, it says all of them are kind of in the same type of mindset. They're all fearful, they're all in awe of what Jesus did. And Peter tells Jesus, go away, because I'm unclean. Because under the law, right, if you were unclean and you touched something that was holy, you could make it unclean. Peter's worried that, hey, this is what's actually going to happen here. And Jesus' response is significant for us, and obviously significant for Peter, because he says, no, even though you're unclean, you're gonna come with me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with you, and I'm going to use you in spite of your failings, whether it's you're focused on money, you don't quite get who it is that I am yet. You're a man of unclean lips. All that stuff. So Jesus is going to redirect his skills that he had been practicing all his, probably through his teenage years. He's going to redirect his catching fish to catching men. And speaking of Peter's life, Peter was married, right? It says in the previous chapter. So Peter was at least 18 years old when he was called, maybe a little older. We don't quite know how old they were exactly. But there's a couple of hints throughout the Gospels that they can tell us, give us an approximate age, or he's probably between 20 and 30. But if we go with the remember the Jewish education thing, at about 20 years old is when you would become apprenticed to a rabbi, who would be at least 30, and you would go out with him and learn from him. So Peter, probably 20 years old, maybe? I don't know. But again, cool to think about. So just like Jesus caught him, right? Jesus is living out his teaching here of catching men, right? He's not just... That's my timer telling me. Getting close. So he's not just telling Peter, hey, you're going to go out and catch men, because in the previous chapter, chapter 4, verse 44, it said that Jesus was preaching throughout Judea, right? And then he came and he caught the fishermen, took them on as his disciples. So he's living out this catching of men right at this time. So they leave everything and they follow him. Another thing that Bailey points out in the book is that, oftentimes things will get a little bit exaggerated. They did certainly leave everything, but they compress it down into this really short period that makes it seem like they just left the fish rotting on the shore, and they probably did not do that. We know that they used boats throughout Jesus' ministry, right? They take trips across the lake on the boat. Peter comes back to the boats after Jesus is crucified, and he's still fishing again. So he goes back to what he knows. The boats are probably there, I don't know, with their families, or just left in the care of somebody else. So, yep, already covered all that. So the structure of Luke 5, 1 through 11. Do you guys want to try to break it down?
Sure.
All right, so let's see if we can break it down and find the pattern here. You need to go in?
Can you want me to go this up so you can?
Oh, sure. Okay. I know you said you needed to go over.
Are you even using the projector anymore?
I don't need it, so if you need to.
Maybe I'll bring it over to get it set.
Okay. All right. So 1 through 11, limited time. So what we're going to do, we're not going to try to write out the whole verse. We'll try to get the big idea down first, and then we'll try to arrange it. So what's the first thing to kind of look out for as you're working through these parallelisms is there might be introductory information, there might be conclusory information, there might be kind of parenthetical explanatory information throughout the middle, right? So you got to look out for that. So what we're looking for is the action, right? What's going on? Like I said before, what's the action? Who's it happening to? Etc. Right? So Bailey termed this Luke 5, 1 through 11. He terms this the prophetic rhetorical template. It's actually, I will give a little bit away. It's a chiastic structure. It's inverted. And there's a miraculous nature miracle. There's a nature miracle in the middle. So that's the climax. So I'll give that away too, because we're running low on time. Right, so the climax is the dramatic catch of fish. All right, so we'll kind of put that, we'll kind of put that in the middle. All right, what do you think, as you're working through the passage, what happens right before the dramatic catch of fish? Yeah, Jesus calls him master. So Peter calls him master. So Peter calls Jesus. He speaks kind of in arrogance. All right. What happens after the dramatic catch? Peter speaks in humility.
I think children's ministry folks need to. Sorry, if you get it, children's ministry so we can take communion. So if you're a teacher for helping out children's ministry,
all right. So what happens before Peter speaks in arrogance? Or yeah, this might be a little.
Jesus commands.
Yep, Jesus commands. All right. Jesus commands him to do what? He commands him to catch fish. All right, how about after Peter speaks in humility, what's Jesus command him to do? Catch people. All right. What happens before? Right before that, what's kind of the main? This is just kind of the start of the action. Yeah. Boat goes out, and what's the last thing that happens? Come back, and yep. So boat goes out. They're not yet disciples of Jesus. All right. They come back. They're disciples following Jesus. All right. So you can see that we got A here, right? Not A there. B. Sorry. C. And D again is the, that's the climax of the story. And we got the opposite of C there and the opposite of B there. So you can see the structure, and it is chiastic. It does have this X where it intersects, the action intersects, and then it works its way back out, and each one corresponds. So pretty cool. Everybody got that? So you can do that, on your own a little bit. Do some practice. You can practice with that the one in 1 Corinthians that I mentioned, and so just in conclusion, finding these parallelisms can help us to interpret the scriptures correctly. You're not going to you're going to be able to see key terms and phrases defined. Kind of how we looked at can't serve God or can't serve two masters, and can't serve God and mammon. Those two clarify each other. What Jesus was saying there. This is actually opposing this. So catching fish, catching people, and again, climax is in the center of this miracle that Jesus performed. So it helps you to identify the significant parts of the passage, and also helps you to find analogies for application. So you can come up with analogies to help people to understand what Jesus is really teaching here. Help us even to understand. We're not going to become experts overnight in doing this. So don't do it alone. Run your ideas by someone else. Anybody catch that? Yeah. That was a parallelism. All right. So just be wary though of, you're not going to find some secret hidden meaning in the scriptures from this, right? It's not going to deviate from your plain understanding of the passage. It's going to enrich it and help you to understand it better, but you're not going to come up with something that is completely contrary to what the passage is saying. So it should really clarify the original, the intent of the passage and help you to understand it better. So, all right. Well, does everybody understand what parallelisms are?
Yes.
And everybody got it? Any questions or anything? Or comments? All right, cool. It's 10:00, so we got to start checking in for children's ministry. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate it.